Cody Wilson created something interesting with 3D printing technology, a working handgun. Can gun control exist in a world in which every home is a potential micro-factory? Let's find out. In Austin, Texas, here's Cody Wilson, creator of the aforementioned gun and director of Defense Distributed. And with us here in studio, Matt Ratto. He's a professor at the University of Toronto's Critical Making Lab. And we welcome both of you guys to the program tonight. Matt, nice to meet you. And Cody, thanks for being there on the line from that little patch of blue in an otherwise big red state. Let's try this for starters. Cody, why did you want to create a gun with a 3D printer in the first place?
I guess you could call it a critical form of making. I thought that embodied in this little package was so many ideas and really a symbol of the future, a competing vision of the future that I thought I wanted to broadcast.
Not sure I follow. A competing vision of the future, competing with what?
Yeah, I've been seeing like the maker community, especially using 3D printing as a technology, like a tabula rasa, just to kind of tell their own story about what the future might mean to them. And maybe it's always this way with new technologies, but for us, we wanted to compete with a story as well. We saw one of decentralized, destabilizing technologies, and in a sense, a leveling and a heightening of ideological strategies. And even though this gun might seem more immediate, like, as a kind of, oh, it's a dangerous tool, we also thought it represented a perfect political symbol. People are going to have more of what they want in this world if it's easy to make, and if it's controversial, it doesn't matter.
Have you got it there with you?
I do, yeah. You want to see it?
Sure.
Yeah, let's take it out. This is EXP002. This is the one I fired on YouTube. Well, YouTube took it down, but the BBC got this one as well.
And at what point did you, and let's just clarify, that thing works?
Yeah, actually, in its current configuration, it will still work too. I've disabled the trigger, but you could still pull the hammer back, and the hammer will fire. Barrels are removable. I can't disassemble the whole thing for you, but I've heard you've got disassembled parts there.
What kind of ammunition does it take?
We designed this barrel around the 380, which is a handgun, a common handgun caliber. And basically all of our 380 tests worked so well for so long, we designed the rest of the gun around the barrel. And then we settled on some springs.
This may seem like an obvious question, but let's go here anyway. What kind of reaction are you getting to the fact that you can make a gun, Cody?
Well, the reactions run the gamut. I mean, one, we got the kind of expected political reaction where these neoliberals demonstrate themselves to be full-on reactionaries, debating about banning an entire technology, for example, or background checks for 3D printers. I mean, if the mill was created, it would never stand a chance in 2013. But then you get the more curious responses and the more, what I think are the more refreshing responses, where people are saying, okay, I get what this is about. I get that this is techno-libertarianism in a kind of new instantiation.
Okay, let's, just before, Matt, I get you involved, let's play a clip from another Toronto guy who we've had on this program numerous times in the past, Cory Doctorow, who's an activist, blogger. Hear what he's got to say, and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please.
In Alabama, it's illegal to make or sell or possess a sex toy, right? Well, that's moderately regulatable in today's environment. But what I want to know is what happens when a magistrate in Alabama in some local court decides that someone like Bree Pettis, who's a 3D printer innovator who lives in New York and who's got a website where you can upload any 3D plan for any 3D object and plug it into your printer and make it, is in essence trafficking sex toys into this guy's jurisdiction by making them available over the internet where a 3D printer might output them.
This is a seriously brave new world in which we're entering. What concerns have you got about it?
Well, I think we're so used to thinking about the digital and the kind of aspects of the digital as something that sits apart from our everyday lives. We're very used to kind of relegating the digital to this other space that we don't live in. What I actually find both a little scary and both very intriguing is the ways in which things like 3D printed guns or 3D printed sex toys call attention to the fact that the digital is not something apart from us. We actually live within it. We don't go to cyberspace anymore. We kind of inhabit it. And so that means that we really have to change how we think about digital technologies, how we think about ourselves, our bodies, and how we think, obviously, about regulation as well.
Are you packing today?
I am packing today.
You want to show us what you got?
Sure. So I downloaded Cody's files soon after he put them up. I was watching for quite a while the work that he was doing, because I really saw that as as I think Cody just said, as a kind of canary in the coal mine, so to speak, for the brave new world that we live within. So that we, when was talking about coming on the show, decided that I would go ahead and print one of these.
How long did that take?
The print itself, I don't exactly know how many hours it took, because we printed it in a series of different parts. I should say that this version was not printed on the type of printer that Cody designed it for. And I also changed some of the parts to make the thing non-functional, mainly because I'm not sure about the regulation here in Canada about printing it. I believe it's actually would have been illegal for me to print it. But it is basically the full model with the removable barrel and with all the springs. And we printed it in a material, a plastic resin that's clear. Also to call attention to the fact that, at least in this one in its current form, is not detectable by any form of metal detector.
Matt, you wrote recently, newly developing tools and spaces for digital fabrication are empowering more citizens to make things which can be seen as a form of political and social activism. And I wonder if you see any fundamental difference between the sex toys example that Cory Doctorow gave in that clip we just showed and Cody's work on printable guns.
Right. Well, there are differences. I'm not sure if they are essential differences, but I think there are differences in practice. One would be simply that a gun can be used to injure or kill somebody, whereas a sex toy could probably be used in that way, but it would take a little bit more work. But I do certainly see the gun.
That video.
See that gun? I see the gun as a form of political action. I think it's a great example of what I wrote about in that piece you just quoted from, which is increasingly people are participating in political processes, not just by voting and not just by protesting, but by making things.
Cody, is there anything in your country illegal about making a gun in a 3D printer?
Well, yes, with a kind of asterisk. And then in the future, yes, definitely. Apparently it's going to be super illegal soon, so I recommend everyone make one now. But if you make the gun in an incorrect order, according to a certain law in the United States, you potentially fabricated or are in constructive possession of what is called an undetectable firearm. There's a law from the 1980s that stipulates that a gun must have a certain amount of metal in it, in the frame, for it to be detectable by metal detectors, or you can't possess, transfer, or make it. If you make the frame first and put the metal in it, and then make the rest of the pieces, though, you're fine.
You've got the Liberator, and I gather that the plans to build one, which were online for a while, have been downloaded, have I got this right, 500,000 times? Is that accurate?
Oh, I'm sure that's accurate. I'll go ahead and stipulate that, like, yes, we had to remove our files from our servers, but the Liberator plans are not offline by any means. And in fact, Liberator 1.1, the Compact Liberator, the Pirate Bay, these places, there's Liberator plans all over the internet. So I would say, I think maybe you just meant taking the plans off of my website, but they're not offline by any stretch.
Okay, yes, off your website. Do you have a problem with that?
Problem with them being off my website?
Yes, with being asked to take them down.
Yeah, I do. I mean, in a sense, the Liberator wasn't even hosted at our. Oh, there's all these ways of arguing about it. But yeah, I do, because in the end, this becomes a freedom of information argument. The United States government, in the end, will argue control through a regulatory process that it has control of that information, and it can say who can put it into what domains and who can't. And at the end of this chain of reasoning, we're going to see, probably in court, the government will hold that the internet isn't considered the public domain. This is absurd.
Cody, let's just understand the larger point that you're trying to make here, which is what?
There's a lot of things going on, but one, I'd like to combat emergency state logic directly. So one, challenging the emergency state to say, look, there's certain things you're not going to be able to regulate, all right? And it was refreshing to hear the talk about making as a political act. And in a sense, this has the spirit of that too. It's taking the 3D printer and, to a degree, making it a political object. I would say it's mostly those two things.
Do you think anybody ought to have the right to do what you have already done?
Oh yeah, no question, no question. In the absence of being like an articulable threat or an imminent harm or a danger to themselves and others, as adjudged individually by a court or a jury of their peers, yeah, anyone should have the right to fabricate for themselves what they will.
And Matt, why did you make yours?
One reason that I made it was in order to explore how difficult it was to do it. The amount of resin that it would take, the difficulty in cleaning and creating it, and to really get a better sense of whether or not it was a simple or a difficult process. And I have to say the other reason that I made it was to really, I think, call attention to the fact that there is serious issues that are facing us as a society. And I mean that in the civil society sense, to go beyond just a U.S. context and talk about a Canadian context. And that we need to come to terms with these things.
You, in fact, told me before we went on air here that you have approached, or you would like to approach the police and give them the heads up on this?
Yeah, so that's right.
Tell us that.
So I've started making kind of feelers into the Toronto police force to try to, I'm very interested in things like ballistic testing of this gun. Are the bullets that emerge from it untraceable by standard forensic methods? What kind of ramifications might we face from this gun? I worry a little bit because I think that the police and other entities like that tend to be reactive rather than responsive, maybe even reactionary in the way that Cody just mentioned. But I think it's a difficult thing to get governments to move on these issues, and unfortunately, I think when they do move, they move in some of the ways that Cody just mentioned, such as outlawing 3D printing or making people have to license 3D printers or things like that. And as we know, that has a chilling effect on innovation. And this, the gun aside, this is a serious site for innovation, and for innovation that has potential to be not just economically beneficial, but beneficial in all sorts of social and environmental ways as well.
Cody, which arms of the American government have been in contact with you to try to deter you from what you've done?
If you go back to the beginning of my project, almost every branch of the United States government in some sense has tried to stop me, hector me, license me in some way. The ATF tried to stop me very early on. Even corporations like Stratasys Incorporated, the big players in 3D printing, have tried to stop me. But really, the people who hold the most power right now, the executive branch, specifically the Department of State and the Political Military Affairs Division.
Follow up on that if you would. What have they specifically tried to do?
Well, they've brought me into this process, this commodity jurisdiction process, where they basically demanded that I play the game where I asked them for permission to host what files I already have collected at my site, DefCat. And what's so unfair about this is that it's purely political nature, because there's mountains of CAD repositories and data all over the internet, but I've been singled out because, well, we were the loudest and we were being intentionally political. In a sense, this is the price you pay to play, but I'm having to do tons of paperwork and probably will face lengthy or very large fines if they don't like some of the files that we hosted for, I guess, since December.
Canadians and Americans might have a bit of a different view on this, so let's see if we can better understand the view from the States. And I think our differences probably emanate from the fact that I think in your country you had north of 10,000 handgun murders last year, and in Canada I think we had 50. So we have a different view about guns here and who ought to be allowed to have them and how prolific they are in society. Is it your view that anybody should be able to have a printer, make a gun, carry it, no background checks, no state interference, period, full stop?
Well, shortly, yes, that's my view, but I think that this is more operable than you might realize, in the sense that there is no system of systems which could create another outcome. I mean, it's already possible if you want to just go buy some pipes and put a gun together. This is another thing that I think has been conflated. People thought, oh no, this is the first time now people can expediently make guns. No, in fact, this is a very inexpedient way of making a gun and kind of ridiculous. But it's trying to be demonstrative and predictive of the future. But yes, I think people should be able to make these things. And in fact, how could you know what people are making right now anyway without monstrous kind of invasions, a terrorism greater than terrorism itself?
Which obviously you would oppose, any kind of state intervention in the home to prevent people printing what they want, right?
Sure. Sure. What kind of system is even capable of that? I mean, this is a challenge. I am trying to say, what is that system? Just the other day, Department of Homeland Security released a memo saying, and I mean, it was ridiculous to me that the questions were even posed this way, but they were saying, well, unfortunately, there may be no way we can stop online proliferation of the Liberator file. Well, good. What kind of system that could do that? And shouldn't we be afraid of something that could do something like that, to wipe the internet clean of a certain file?
Matt, having said that, in this country, we do have a different approach and a different attitude, I think, to guns, handguns in particular, and you got to have a firearms certificate in this country if you want to own a gun.
That's right.
Well, that is if you buy it somewhere where they know you're buying it. This is a way to make it with nobody knowing you've got it.
Yeah.
Any concerns there for you?
Well, I mean, it is, as Cody just mentioned as well, it is the case that you can go down to your Home Depot and pick up a couple of plumbing supplies and probably with a Dremel and maybe a drill, basically fabricate what's known as a gadget gun or a zip gun. It's really not that difficult to do. I think one of the reasons I made this, in fact, and I think I would have to follow up by actually making a gadget gun as well, which I don't think I'm going to do, in order to explore what the different nature of the work is. I mean, it is the case that it requires expert skill to 3D print a gun. 3D printing is not a technology. It's not the Starship replicator. It requires expertise and knowledge in addition to economic capability, like having the money to buy a 3D printer and the supplies and the computing equipment to run it. So there's certainly the case that this isn't in and of itself new, and it is somewhat ridiculous. But there is a law here in Canada where people are not allowed to make guns. So there is legislation against it, which there isn't in the US in quite the same way. But again, discoverability, I mean, how would you know? How would you know if somebody went down to the Home Depot and picked up this stuff? How would you know if somebody printed something like this on a 3D printer? But again, how would you know about all sorts of illegal activities that are happening? So.
You did a report on some of the issues that we're talking about today, and in that report you discussed liability and consumer safety. What can you add to our understanding of this on that?
Well, so that's an interesting question, and I think that Bray Pettis, as one of the founders of MakerBot, who was mentioned by Cory Doctorow in that initial clip, whether or not he would be liable for somebody printing sex toys in Alabama, whether or not Cody Wilson would be liable for somebody printing guns in Ontario, Canada, whether or not somebody who takes a file off of an online repository and prints a shelf bracket, which then collapses under the weight and knocks them on the head, whether the designer of that bracket would be liable for that activity. This, again, is a case where our standard mechanisms for evaluating and managing liability of made objects is obviously somewhat falling apart at this point, and we're going to have to develop new systems for doing that. Or, and I think this is probably part of Cody's points, maybe, is we're going to have to rely on self-reliance of individuals to make good decisions about what they print, what they make, how they use things, and rely less on legislation. I don't actually agree with that necessarily, but at this point we need to do a lot more work to figure out what an alternative to that.
I should give Cody a chance just to speak to that, and if in fact that does accurately characterize part of what you're trying to say here.
Certainly, yeah. I would complement the previous comments with saying that basically things are already moving so quickly. Now, we can see the precedents in the file sharing world before 3D files, but my Liberator file, for example, by the way, it's licensed by Defense Distributed, but that's already been remixed by countless people, and there are different iterations already online, pseudonymous authorship. I mean, how would you even know who to appeal to in the end? A lot of the administrative products liability questions that we turn to rely on 20th century logic about, like the Schumpeterian administration of the economy. Well, there will be large corporations and we can appeal to them. No, now you're getting designers in the dark net, people that you don't even know, voting files up. And in the end, it's going to depend upon community ratings of these files for you to even approach that. You would want to know, well, what does the community think of this file before you risk or hazard using it?
You're a law student,
You're
yes?
not going to have many appeals. That's right, yeah.
Where are you studying law?
I study law at the University of Texas in Austin.
Okay. I guess I don't have to tell you then that potentially you are opening yourself up to enormous liability lawsuits going forward by having this information out there under your name. Are you concerned about that?
Well, that's just it. In the end, it's not directly under my name. It's under Defense Distributed's name. Now, I know you can pierce the corporate veil and everything and go after people, but yeah, this was one of the things. We had a huge conversation with a libertarian law firm in the very beginning of this project in August of 2012, the Institute for Justice, and we went by all the big questions, you know, the gun questions, the regulatory questions, the liability questions. In the end, I just felt like this was something worth doing and worth risking almost all of that. Trying to do it as best I could, but in the end, sure, someone's going to try to make a case. Someone might intentionally hurt themselves or not, and they might try to come after Defense Distributed. But this is the price of progress.
Who's on your side in this debate?
I don't know. You know, it's an interesting band of people starting to come together, especially after State Department ordered the takedown of the files. You saw there's this incredible Reddit thread where people who were typically anti-gun, just as a cultural matter, realized, wow, they're making me choose between freedom of information and this culture war point. I guess I embrace the gun now. I mean, you're getting all kinds of strange bedfellows here. We're mixing elements of what we might consider traditional left and right, and in the end, like, I think libertarianism is kind of winning as the banner. So anyone with a general libertarian sentiment is coming over. Now, I'll take full credit or blame for being somewhat antagonistic about this whole process. So I don't have many strong public supporters, but I do have a lot of people in low places who don't raise their heads much.
Well, this is why I asked the question, because in some respects, and I don't know if they support you, which is why I'm asking, I could imagine that the National Rifle Association, for example, would be in your corner, but I could also imagine, because of the arguments against government intrusiveness in your life, that the American Civil Liberties Union could also be in your corner, and I can't imagine too many files on which the NRA and the ACLU are on the same side. But are they in this case?
You know, I hear a lot of the people in the NRA are actually true believers in this sense of these American neo-Republican radicals. I don't know what the NRA's opinion is, and they've been smart to really distance themselves from this. I have no idea if I have allies there. But what you're saying is true, and I'm seeing that in other satellite organizations too. In fact, the Electronic Frontier Foundation supports this, and at the same time, so does the Second Amendment Foundation. These groups are not groups that commonly, I don't know, come together on anything.
Matt, has this issue hit the radar screen at all in Canada enough to start getting people lining up on one side or another?
You know, I've only seen very little, even media coverage within Canada in particular on this issue. I think it's a little still behind the scenes, particularly for a public response. As far as I know, the only response I found is the RCMP making a statement saying that if anybody is found in possession of one of these things, that they would be liable to be charged. But I think that the issue of bringing, you know, ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the second rights groups, the Second Amendment groups, and I mean, that's a fascinating question, and it does speak to a kind of policy scrum that you see in the U.S. that I think Canada is not particularly known for, but I think they need to be getting to it fairly soon.
But let's be clear here. You have disabled that gizmo in front of you.
Yeah.
No, it is non-functioning.
Yeah. No, we printed it in a way that made it so the springs don't have the tensile strength or characteristics. So in fact, it won't even lock back into the trigger. There's a plug that we inserted within it, and we went through the steps like that pre-printing. We made these modifications so that at no point could we be charged with breaking Canadian law.
So my question is essentially what you're holding in your hand there. A very expensive, sophisticated toy.
Yeah, this is a toy model of the Liberator, that's right. Yeah. Though with basic changes, with turning back the changes that we made, it would no longer be a toy. So obviously it reduces the line between what a toy gun is and what a real gun is.
But if it's a toy, can you? I mean, you can't be charged for carrying a toy gun, can you? Or can you?
No, I don't think so. I sure hope not. I'm wondering if tonight I'm going to get a knock on my door. Yeah, exactly. But again, and I have to say something, by the way, to take one step back. We're very used to thinking about these things, thinking about rights and thinking about things like freedom of expression from a U.S. context, or a Second Amendment rights, these things as pure rights. But in fact, they're not. Legislation is a muddy instrument. It's well known. Law is a muddy instrument for dealing with the vagaries of the real world. We see that in intellectual property law. We see that in regulatory law all the time. And what's interesting about things like this gun is the way that it really calls attention to the inability of law to act as a pure instrument. So, even freedom of expression, as Cody knows, other people probably know this as well, doesn't cover certain types of speech. There are types of speech that are exempt from that. So probably what will happen here is there'll be legislation around these issues that doesn't quite work, but provides some good compromise.
All right. Cody, let me give you the last 30 seconds on this. What's the next phase of your quest in all of this?
Finding legal protection and operating either above or below ground. There's a huge community here, and there's a lot of curiosity and interest, and it's something I would like to facilitate.
Understood. It's good of you to join us on the line from Austin, Texas. Cody Wilson from Defense Distributed, the law student. Thanks so much, Cody.
All right, thanks for having me.
And Matt Ratto from the University of Toronto's Critical Making Lab, which is housed, am I allowed to say where you're housed?
Yeah, as long as they don't come and take my gun away.
In the John P. Robarts Public Library on the campus of the University of Toronto. Thanks so much to you too, Matt.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.